Hi everybody, my name is Jonas Jørgensen. I'm an associate professor at the Center for Soft Robotics at the University of Southern Denmark. And I'm presenting on behalf of myself and Bering Christiansen today, who unfortunately could not be present. Our paper is called Sounding Softness and the Artificial Subject. And it's a short paper, so I was actually under the impression that I only had 10 minutes to present and take questions, so my presentation might be a bit short, but the benefit of that is, of course, then we have a lot more time for questions, so hopefully you will have some. Okay, so how do I... Okay. As an empirical phenomenon, sound by far predates life. However, within the Western tradition of logocentric thinking, sound is often positioned as this unbridled carrier of being and subjectivity through the subject's voice. When we look at robots, they also make sound and have a kind of voices. But there seems to be two poles. So on the one hand, we have these machine-like robots that use these alarms and beeps and bleeps and so on. And then we have these humanoid or android robots that replicate the social behaviors of humans and also seek to replicate their authentic voices through the use of increasingly human-like synthetic voices. In our practice, we work with a radically different type of robot that falls outside the conceptual and cultural space spanned by these two poles. So we're working with soft robots, and soft robots are basically robots whose bodies are composed of soft and pliable material. And in our paper, we discuss a specific soft robotic artwork, namely the work called SONŌ, which is this sound-producing soft robot that you see here. SONŌ explores a nexus of sound, soft robotics, and subjectivity. It seeks to enact complex interactions between these phenomena and their aesthetic and epistemological capture, and to trace connections between soft materiality and sound. More specifically, the work explores how sound and embodiment may interact in proto-social soft robots of unconventional, non-anthropomorphic and non-zoomorphic designs. So the soft robot morphology that we developed for the installation is relatively simple. So it's this morphology that you see here, and it is not directly inspired by any biological counterpart. It has 3 separate pneumatic channels as indicated in the colors in the diagram here. And overall, this work was guided by a notion of soft sound as a kind of nature cultural phenomenon. So what I mean by this is that in our practice we sought to take into consideration a wide range of material semiotic conditions that through which sound and soft materiality and robotic movement can attain agency. So in our practice we were also furthermore interested to probe this chimeric or synesthetic character of softness as it relates to both materials and to sound. So the initial drivers of our synthetic research were these questions about what is soft sound and what might a soft robot actually sound like. And as you can see from this list here, we do on a wide range of inspirations to actually address these questions. So we looked into musical theory and psychoacoustics and sound studies relating to the character of soft sound. And we also looked at cultural representations of these imaginary soft creatures from movies, for instance, and used that as design inspirations for different experiments with the sound generation. So the setup that we developed for the installation is the one you see here. So we built this plinth which had everything integrated except a set of external speakers that are used. And on the top we have the robot morphology, which is cast in silicone, and then we have an electropneumatic system to actuate the robot. And then we, in addition to that, have a sound generation system, which is basically a laptop PC that's running a software synthesizer. And then we have an audio interface and an active loudspeaker. What happens sort of technically in the system is that when the robot's movements are triggered through pneumatic actuation, a signal is then sent to this FM synthesizer, which then in real time creates sonification to match the robot's movements. And it also generates an accompanying soundscape that functions as a kind of way to create a context for this movement. So in our paper, we go into a little bit more detail about both the conceptual and the enactive practices that underlie this work, but also the technical realization of the work. But I'll just briefly explain how we did this generation of the robot's behaviors. So basically, the robot operates as a kind of finite state machine and has 4 mood states, which it can then switch between. And in each of these states, the robot then has a finite number of phrases that it can choose between. So these phrases are composed of both movement and sound. And then what happens is that the robot generatively combines these kind of basic sentences or characters, or what you would call them, into this expression that it generates. And as I said previously, in addition to the robot sound, for sonification, we also have a soundscape that is played asynchronously with 12 different compositions. In future work, we would like to also add interactivity to this installation, as currently the robot does not have any sensors and does not really respond to people. We would also like to develop more this effective movement and sound generation, so that we step away from having this finite state system into a parametric system instead, where we can have more nuance and variation in the robot's expression. And if you're interested in more details about the work, I encourage you to consult our paper and also some of our other publications. Thank you. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to go into more details or expand on anything.
Hi there, thanks for your presentation. Can you build a little bit more or expand or elaborate a little bit more on the pipeline of the robotic movements to sound? Was there any sort of attempt to design the sound? Is the soundscape that you mentioned static? Is there any modulation of sound that happens between the movements to the sound? Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for that question. This is a practice-based project that was started already in 2019. So we've had a lot of different iterations, and the kind of work that I chose to present here is the final installation that we exhibited for the first time in the fall last year. But throughout this process, we took different strategies for composing the design or designing the sound designs. I mentioned this very briefly, but we did designs where we kind of challenged ourselves to, as a kind of a dogma rules or something like that, where we said, okay, we only look at the musical theory, for instance, and look at how is soft sound described there, and how does that actually work together with a soft morphology and with this kind of soft movement. And then we had some sound designs that were based on that. And then we also did, which eventually became this final sound design that I also played today, which was inspired by cultural representations of imaginary soft creatures. So mainly movies like Flubber and Slither and all these other kinds of sci-fi or other types of cultural representations of or imaginations about how soft imaginary creatures might sound. And then for the second part of your question, so what happens is that the audio is generated in real time in this FM synthesizer. So what happens is that there's an envelope that modulates the cutoff frequency of a filter, and also the filter the frequency of an oscillator, and that's what creates this kind of sweeping motion in the sound design that I just played. But there was a lot of different inspirations, and there's a lot of vast area and a lot of material to look at into this. Something that we also were interested in is in how materiality and sound interact physically. So for instance, how sound is dampened and reflected by different types of materials, and how resonance in materials creates sound, and if we could try to replicate that. So we also made a sound design which was supposed to be a kind of contrast to this soft materiality that was inspired by the sound that a glass makes when you kind of rub your finger around the edge. So, yeah, hope this answers your question.
On va prendre une dernière question.
We can take a final question here.
I have two questions. So the first one is, I saw some color coding, and I was wondering what the different colors were meant for. And the second question is about the agency of this soft robot. So you described different moods. What is the vision if it's not yet? What would affect it? What would make it angry or not angry? And which context are you imagining?
Thanks for that question, or those two questions. So the diagram that I showed, that was basically just the pneumatic channels. So in the robot has a number of compartments that can be inflated to basically create this modulation of the surface, or this movement, or what you want to call it. So instead of having each of them controllable, we did a design where we have some of them are interconnected, but they kind of intertwine. So we can have 3 pneumatic channels that we can inflate with electrical pumps and release the air with a pneumatic valve. So basically that was just to still give a kind of coherent or organic appearance of the robot, that we have these interconnected channels that intertwine all over the surface. And then your second question was about the agency of this thing, or this creature, or this robot, or what we want to call it. And I think that what we also kind of wanted to play with here is that this is kind of very unpowerful robot in a sense. It doesn't really have any manipulators or anything. It's this completely sessile entity that just sits there and just moves or breathes or however you want to interpret what it actually does. And that was quite interesting to us also. Like, how can we create something that has an effect or that is effective, able to be affected and affect, but uses these simple means and doesn't really have any kind of a physical agency in the setting. So that was kind of what we were working with also.